Welcome back to the Humble Healer podcast. This is a Christmas Day podcast. Merry Christmas for those who celebrate Christmas and happy holidays to everyone else. And thank you for taking your time tuning in. And it does not have to be today on Christmas Day, but I hope that you tune into this episode later on. So today we'll continue with the series on how to improve your life with lesson from the Stoics. This is part 2, and part one of this series, I discussed about how most of my life lessons and guiding principles are very similar to what the Stoics have taught humanity for the past over 2,000 years. And the Stoics taught that virtue was the highest good in life, and that to be virtuous, we must foster in ourselves virtues for subtypes, courage, the moderation, and justice. We discussed the following lessons from the previous episode. First one was self-examination. If you get to know yourself and others better, you'll be able to see your action in a clearer light. Actually, this is one of the most important lessons in the Art of War, written by a Chinese or multiple Chinese war philosophers, Sun Tzu, and knowing yourself and knowing your enemy almost guarantee victories. So in this sense, this clarity about knowing yourself and others better will help you choose actions that are courageous, wise, moderate, and just. Lesson number 2 is maintaining focus. This is just a quick overview of what we went through. Recognizing and accepting that something is simply beyond your control. Remember that in one of my previous episodes, I cannot control what life brings, but I can control how I respond to them. Live life as a journey, not a destination. Savor the process, as small progresses daily bring about big positive changes. Lesson number 3 is set expectation. Expect the unexpected resistance, obstacle, and challenges. Instead of obsessively planning ahead, trying to factor in every possible complications, Stoics foster creativity, independence, and inventiveness. This makes them flexible as well as resilient in the face of changing circumstances. In short, prepare to overcome any challenges that life throws in their path. Stoics train themselves to turn obstacles to their advantage, to use obstacles as opportunities. So now today we will explore a new lesson from the Stoics. First one is be alert of our own biases and bring more clarity to our thoughts. We do have unconscious biases, and the ability to be mindful and pause before we make judgment and being influenced by these biases will help provide a lot more wisdom and clarity to our decision. The mind has a nifty ability to make split decisions based on past experiences. Like when you hear an angry dog barking behind you, and before you know it, you leapt into a branch of a nearby tree. That's helpful and good, but as the Stoics have pointed out, this ability has a downside. It's just as easy for us to self-affirm our prejudices at the same lightning speed. For instance, you meet a total stranger at a party who just happened to look exactly like your high school arch nemesis, and you find yourself being rude to this blameless stranger without even being aware of that. The key is that can you recognize that unconscious bias or prejudice and put a stop to that? It's not always easy, but before you act, pause, consider what assumption and prejudice you're bringing to the table. Ask yourself questions like, what could I have overlooked here? Or is it possible? Am I wrong about this? Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor and one of the founding fathers of Stoicism, wrote that we should look for cause and effect in our thoughts and actions and try to understand which kinds of action results from particular prejudices. In medicine, we sometimes have preconception and prejudice about patients even before you see them or shake their hand or enter a room to see them. And I spend a lot of time trying to dissuade clinicians, nurses, and other healthcare workers from doing that and try to convince them or persuade them to take a step back and keep an open mind, regardless of what the chief complaint was, and enter the room with a neutral state of mind, or with a state of mind that I am here to help you no matter what the complaint is. Another way to identify flaws in thinking is to stay alert to an all too human tendency, automatically and involuntarily adding interpretation to what you observe. A person can look at something with an observing eye or a perceiving eye, and there's a big difference between the two. The observing eye sees things for what they truly are. In contrast, the perceiving eye incorporate things with meaning. The perceiving eye tend to add its own spin and prejudice to things, and this can cause trouble because you create problems where there are none. or treat complete stranger like a high school enemy. Next lesson, aspire to virtuousness in all you do. All Stoics aspire to virtuousness. According to the Stoic, virtue is the highest purpose one can commit to. And as you know, virtue itself is a composite concept made up of courage, wisdom, moderation, and justice. Aspiring to virtuousness is beneficial because it will help you cut through all of life confusions. An example, let's say your sole goal is in life is to make money. The issue with this goal is that first off, you never had enough, and second, you might compromise your character, committing atrocious deeds in pursuit of self-enrichment. And you could argue for money, well, besides money, power, prestige, fame, and all that. Compromise yourself, compromise the values of your family, and so on. Virtue is different. If you truly pursue it, truly striving to act courageously, moderately, and justly, you won't sacrifice your moral on the altar of greed. You may make plenty of money in your life. Why not? But that money won't be the be-all and end-all of your life, and it certainly won't be ill-earned. To pursue virtuousness, though, you have to be entirely self-committed. No one's going to make you do it. As Seneca wrote in his Moral Letters, every noble deed is voluntary. For Marcus Aurelius and many other thinkers, this entails helping others. As Marcus Aurelius put in his Meditations writing, working with others is what you've been made by nature for. Each of us has a stake in making the world a better place, and the best way to do that is to help one another. I will dedicate one whole episode to how service to humanity and others can bring happiness and contentment to ourselves and even our families, because we do teach them and set a good example for others that follow us. Quote, "The ignorant work for their own profit, the wise work for the welfare of the world." Bhagavad Gita. We do not need to own anything in order to serve. We seek to leave a place cleaner than we found it, people happier than we found them, and the world better than we found it. Look and observe nature carefully. Nature is always serving. The sun provides sun and light. The tree gives oxygen and shade. Water quenches our thirst. The trees live solely for the benefit of others. They tolerate rain, snow, heat, but still provide oxygen, air, and shades for us. The trees represent what the universe does, which is serving others. It follows that the only way to align properly with the universe is to serve, because that is what the universe does. We can always make materialistic donation, but just as important is donating our time and knowledge for humanity. In aligning with the universe, we are compelled to serve, and only in service can we be happy and find contentment. Seeing the purpose of life to be sensory gratification, making ourselves feel good, leading to pain and dissatisfaction, but seeing it as service leads to fulfillment. Stoics are focused on results, so they are pragmatic in their action. Another lesson. We should let our idealism limit us in setting our goals. One has to accept that the world is as it is before he or she tries to change it. Accept things as they really are doesn't weaken the desire for change. In fact, it makes the effort to bring it about more effective. Stoicism recognizes that while the things we do might be imperfect, this doesn't mean that we shouldn't try at all. This kind of all or nothing thinking can prevent you from making any progress. So don't let perfection be the enemy of the good. It's better to try and fall short than not to try at all. Next lesson, Stoics rely on themselves, remaining resilient despite changing circumstances. Stoic believes that no matter what happened to us, we always remain in control of who we are. They even came up with a metaphor for this. We each possess an inner citadel or fortress, which remain impregnable, completely in our control no matter what we may endure physically. The Stoics said that this citadel houses the soul, and whether you believe in souls or not, the metaphor is useful. Remember, this citadel is impervious to external threats, but it can be threatened from within. In other words, though your citadel can be damaged by rain and lightning and snow, but it can be damaged by how you react to bad weather. Through a grievous accident can harm it. It can be harmed by how you react to that accident. After all, to a Stoic, misfortune is just another opportunity to become stronger. In On Providence, a piece written by Seneca, he claimed that someone who has never known difficulty is unlucky. It shows he's never been tested, so there's no way he'll know his true potential. There's a second consequence to the inner citadel. Stoics know that only they have power over their mind. Their own minds would make them very resilient. An example of a student of Stoicism is a U.S. pilot, a Navy Vice Admiral, James Stockdale, who was living proof of this. When his plane was shot down over Vietnam, he knew that incredible hardship would follow. But as his plane went down, he thought of the teachings of Epictetus and knew he could hold out. He spent the next 7.5 years as prisoner of war in the Vietnamese communist prison, during which he was brutally tortured by his captors. But he never sought solace in unrealistic expectation of sudden liberation and never allowed the experience to change who he was. Stockdale knew that staying true to himself was his best hope of resistance. Indeed, he was so committed to this philosophy that he once deliberately injured himself so that he wouldn't be forced by his captors to appear in a propaganda video. As a Stoic and a student of Epictetus, who, remember, was enslaved until he was 30 years old, Stockdale knew that though there was nothing he could change about his situation, he could always control his reaction to it. Fortitude, or resilience in difficult circumstances, is an admirable skill. As we'll examine now, we don't always have to go it alone. Stoics understand the interconnectedness of all things and that motivate us to do the right things. They call this interconnectedness sympatheia. It helps them vision everything as part of a larger whole. In his writing, Meditation, Marcus Aurelius described how everything in the universe is interconnected. He even explained through an analogy how people should be imagined as bees living in the same hive. What is bad for the beehive will ultimately be bad for the bees. To put it in other way around, anything that isn't harmful to the community can ultimately harm the individual, because a wise person understands that the good of the many is always the highest priority. This means that all impulses and actions should be directed toward that aim. Next lesson is for faith is not a source of fear, but instead motivates them. It's a common tendency to think of hope as good and fear as bad, but Stoics are skeptical of both. After all, both hope and fear involve attaching value to future events, which are by definition out of our control. So instead of focusing on wishes and worries and hope, they prefer amor fati, a love of fate. In other words, they go a step further than throwing up their hand and saying what will be, will be. Que sera, sera. They embrace fate even if events don't play out in their favor, rather than pointlessly wishing they could change the circumstances to fit their desire. Stoics instead adapt their desire to the situation. This is Stoics' art of acquiescence or acceptance. It's a clever strategy since Stoics learn to accept events and take responsibility for their own lives. However, it's important to note that acceptance isn't shorthand for passivity. Example is the U.S. President FDR, Franklin D. Roosevelt. He had craved and worked toward the office of presidency in his entire life. But suddenly, at the age of 39, he was diagnosed with polio. He knew there was nothing that he could do about the disease, but he recognized his reaction to it was entirely his choice. So he calmly accepted the situation and refused to see himself as a victim. The rest is history. Went on to be elected to the presidency 4 times. Just think about the energy that you could save by not wishing for the impossible. Success is entirely achievable if you invest that energy and work with the actual situation as it stands before you. Next lesson. Stoics do not fear death. They accept and embrace its power. You see that the one mighty Roman Empire fell in the West after 500 years. The longest human lifespan recorded in just 122 years. Everything and everyone must eventually come to an end. It's a concept of impermanence, similar to what the Buddha is teaching. That's why Stoicism teaches us to accept death. That's inevitable, and death is part of life. And it uses that as a motivator to live life well. We talk about one of the messages that I recommended for everyone to tell themselves as they start their day. Every day is, life is short. I may not see another sunrise tomorrow, so I'll live today like my last. Those who are consciously aware and facing the possibility of death are actually a lot happier and appreciate life a lot more, become more grateful for what life gives them. Marcus Aurelius wrote that we should live every day as though it's our last. He didn't mean that we should descend into a frenzy of hedonistic indulgence. He just meant that we should live bravely without apathy, much as we should approach our every deed as though it was our last. Live as though you have to look back on the day's acts from your deathbed. Live in such a way that you look back and be content with no regret. Of course, the thought of death is frightening. We can't know what awaits us, but the Stoics recognize an important feature of death. It is really the end of everything. There's nothing to fear. It brings with it the end of worry, pain, of course, death itself. In fact, Seneca went so far to admonish his friends and family when they begged his executioner to spare his life. He scolded them for forgetting their philosophical training. As far as his were concerned, they should have been ready to accept death just as he was. To philosophize, Cicero argued, is to learn how to die, meaning we can use philosophy to make the most of our time. While it's interesting to meditate on wisdom of philosophy and life big questions, to the Stoics, philosophy serves as a practical purpose. It's a tool that you must use every day to carefully shape your own life, a life that you'll be happy with when it finally comes to an end. In conclusion, Stoicism is above all a practical philosophy. It provides a set of guiding principles that can help you make a better choice in life. Applying Stoicism successfully, and you find yourself not just believing in your own abilities, through determination and self-motivation, you'll be able to improve yourself and society as a whole. Thank you for tuning in to this episode. I know it's very philosophical and abstract, but if you want to listen to it again, you do so. And also, a lot of these messages I have talked about in the previous episodes, so they're very similar to the previous points that I made about the life guiding principles that I've learned. Please, if you find this informative, subscribe to the channel, share and like, and also hit the bell notification. Thank you. And again, Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays from Dr. Kwang Lei, family medicine physician.